Greetings, adventurers, and welcome back to the Den of the Drake. Other dragons hoard gold, while I hoard internet cringe. If you're watching this video, I assume that you have access to a laptop, smartphone, or desktop computer. So you probably are subject to many of the first world problems that we all like to complain about online. No matter who you are, man, woman, child, or somewhere in between, if you are living in a first world country, there is one question that's eating away at you. Why is everything so f***ing expensive? Water, electricity, gas, insulin. I can't even die on a budget because caskets cost $2,000. Unfortunately, it's an unavoidable reality that many people need to split the cost of rent with at least one other person. And if any of you have done a dive into the lore of red dragons, you should know how much I hate sharing my stuff. I've had roommates in the past. Some were awesome, others not so much. Despite having experience with sharing a living space, the thought of sharing my home with a stranger is still terrifying to me. I mean, have you seen some of the troglodytes that exist in society? Can you imagine going to bed at night, knowing that Pamper Chew is right across the hall? Today's story stars a D&D player who has to deal with an insufferable that guy, who just so happens to be one of the worst roommates imaginable. Now, without any further delay, let's go ahead and dive right into the horrifying world of r/RPG-Horror-Stories. Enjoy. This story is titled, Problem Player Booted from Home, Attempts to Build a New One Using Acid Splash. Throughout my 18 years of TTRPGs, I've had the good fortune of only encountering one problem player. But oh my, was he a doozy. You see, it was not enough for him to merely be a nightmare D&D participant, but also be a nightmare roommate. However, I'm getting ahead of myself. Full disclosure, this sequence of events took place nearly 10 years ago. While granular details are a bit fuzzy, I swear that everything this guy pulled is true. Myself and 5 of my pals were renting an off-campus house together during the second half of our college careers. Amongst them was my best friend, who hosted a weekly 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons campaign, set in the Dark Sun setting. We were decently far into our quest to topple the tyrannical sorcerer kings when our DM received a fateful phone call. On the other line was another amigo of ours, let's call him Corey, a fellow nerd around our age from a few cities over. He explained that he's looking for a place to crash for a short while. Evidently, some family drama caused a rather ugly shouting match between Corey and his parents that resulted in them kicking him out of the house. The DM ran this request by the rest of the tenants, and we agreed to offer Corey the living room until he found a place of his own, an invitation that he gratefully accepted. He assured us that it would only be for a week or two, as he had already been doing online job and apartment hunting in the area. A few days later, his friend dropped Corey off with all his stuff, and he officially began crashing on the living room couch. Since we had a spot open, we also invited him to join the weekly campaign. This'll be fun, right? Week 1. Say, do you hear alarm bells? Our temporary roomie opted for a tiefling warlock, and united with our group during an arena-style fighting tournament. Things were going fine for the first hour until we noticed that nearly every attack lobbed his way would miss, even exceptionally high rolls. Our DM let it rock for the session, but asked to review Corey's character sheet afterwards. It took only a few moments before he raised an eyebrow in concern. DM: Corey, where is the +2 miscellaneous bonus to your AC coming from? Corey: my tail armor. DM: your what? Corey: think about it. Since tieflings have tails, that means that they have more appendages, where armor can be equipped. DM: Except A, that's not a racial feature stated in the books, and B, there's no such thing as tail armor in the equipment guide. Corey, all I am doing is correcting an obvious oversight on the part of Wizards of the Coast. He continued to limply argue that he deserves a higher AC than everyone else, before finally relenting in the end. It's around the end of the first week that we start feeling the effects of Corey moving in. He refused to shower until around 2 p.m. each day, meaning we would have to endure his odor when anywhere near the living room. Most times when we saw him, Corey was playing Star Trek Online, using the community big screen TV. He'd also ask for rides, which wasn't really too big of a deal. After all, with no car of his own, he had no reliable way to reach his job interviews. Well, I suppose that there was public transport via the bus system, but those would cost money that he didn't have when he moved in. Wait, what was that last part? Week 2. Another tale to spin. Corey had already begun to test our collective patience. When he wasn't hogging the living room TV, he would criticize our taste in shows and video games, which we would watch and play on it. It didn't take long for this negative and haughty attitude to rear its wretched head within the guy's D&D habits either. Our newest ally saw fit to shoot down almost every strategy we concocted before proposing his own superior plan of action. Naturally. What's more, Corey grew increasingly argumentative with the DM. His greatest hits included, "That rule is stupid. Actually, that is not how it works." And by far his personal favorite, 3.5 edition was so much better. Why don't we switch to that? Mercifully, we eventually hit another combat encounter, where his running commentary would taper. However, that's when we ran into a different issue. Corey was rolling an extra d20 while making basic melee attacks. When asked about it, he stated that he was wielding another dagger with his tail, and therefore gets an extra attack. As one might expect, the DM didn't really appreciate Corey granting himself additional perks behind his back, and in direct defiance of the rules. Again. All he had to say in his defense was, "But that is how it worked in 3.5 edition." It was not. Thankfully, he again acquiesced to the DM, and stopped rolling for 2 attacks. He explained that Corey was free to describe his tiefling slashing with a dagger held by his tail, for flavor. But for some reason, Corey didn't seem to like it as much when it didn't give him an in-game advantage. Weird. Ugh, screw this guy. I know exactly what it's like to have a gross and selfish roommate like this. If you don't care about me personally and are just here for the story, go ahead and feel free to skip past this commentary, because I'm about to provide a horror story of my own. So when I was doing my undergrad in college, I lived in my school's dorms, which were a little bit bigger than like a walk-in closet, where I was partnered with a foreign exchange student. Let's call him Grimy. At first, I was excited to meet him, but when I was introduced, this was a morbidly obese dude who stank like a rotting cantaloupe. But the worst part? He didn't speak English. Well, that's not true. He knew one word, and that word was no. Here's what interactions between me and Grimy were like. "Grimy, pick up your clothes." "No." "Grimy, quit leaving your rotting egg salad on your desk. We have a fridge." "No." "Grimy, get out of the bathroom. You've been in there for 2 hours." "No." "Grimy, flip on your side. Your snoring is keeping me awake." "No." "Grimy, quit wiping bloody mucus on the..." Okay, Grimy, what the f***? So when I say that I relate to this OP, I really relate to this OP. The selfishness on display here directly relates to their behavior at the D&D table. As I've said time and time again, D&D is a cooperative game, and this level of selfishness just isn't gonna fly. In Corey's mind, the world revolves around him, whether it's the real world or the world of Dungeons and Dragons. Unfortunately, a lot of the time, this level of selfishness is terminal. I'm not saying not to try and work out your issues, but just be prepared that the only way to improve your game is to kick the player. Week 3. Fort Acid Splash ain't up to code. House tensions are at an all-time high. Everyone stays in their rooms, lest they leave themselves vulnerable to the stank and complaints emanating from the living room. Corey's newest favorite pastime is pissing and moaning about the results of the Spider-Man vs. Batman episode of Death Battle to anyone who will listen. To his credit, he was applying for jobs, but they were few and far between when compared to his hours of Star Trek Online when living at our place rent-free. D&D night arrives, and nothing could have prepared us for the absurdity that waited. The desert night crept ever closer towards our intrepid band of heroes. Having hastily escaped the Battle Coliseum, we had no opportunity to procure bedrolls or camping tents. Thankfully, we possessed everything we needed to create an ad hoc shelter, a warlock with acid splash. While the rest of the party searches for a nearby cave, Corey has his tiefling continuously cast his at-will spell, 4E's equivalent of a cantrip, acid splash at the sand on the ground. Understandably perplexed, our esteemed DM inquired about his end goal. His answer? Corey, I am constructing a small fortress out of diamond. I ran some numbers, and based on how frequently I can cast it, I should be able to build one big enough to house all of us within 2 in-game hours. A flabbergasted silence blanketed the table like a burial shroud. Corey, oh yeah, if it's okay with you, DM, I'd also like to keep little bastion slits in the walls for defensive fire, in case we are attacked. DM, that's not how diamonds work. Like at all. Thus, Corey saw fit to grind the entire session to a halt, in a vain attempt to scientifically prove that his tiefling could pull off this stunt. The DM was forced to pull up his laptop and Google how diamonds form. This was before the advent of smartphones. And wouldn't you know it, Corey was wrong. But was he deterred? Oh, perish the thought. He insisted that the DM seek out this one specific website that he found this one time, but doesn't remember the exact name. But you can go ahead and plug in these specific words into the search bar, yada yada yada. Thankfully, DM-san had had enough. He firmly told Corey that he was not allowed to do that, and moved on. Corey sort of just sulked in the corner for the remainder of the session. We had all reached our breaking point. The next day, we called a meeting with Corey and let him know that he was swiftly wearing out his welcome. We expressed our aggravations about his negative and petty attitude bogging down both the campaign and the living situation. Perhaps a little too bluntly, if I'm being honest. We brought forth an ultimatum. If he wanted to continue living here, he would have to kick in rent like the rest of us. He reiterated that he was flat broke and still hadn't landed a job. One of us asked if he had applied at the Burger King a few blocks from the house, since they had a now hiring sign up. I don't recall Corey's exact phrasing here, but luckily it doesn't matter. However he chose to dress it up, his answer boiled down to one simple response. I do not want to work fast food or retail though. He said this with nary a hint of irony to a room full of retail workers and full-time college students. We gave him 2 weeks to find other lodging. Needless to say, he was not welcome at the D&D table anymore either. Week 4. The Aftermath. Luckily for Corey, he was able to convince another group of mutual friends to take him into their off-campus rental house. Tragically, no lesson had been learned over the past month. Corey monopolized the living room TV, did not get a job, would not apply at retail or fast food, and put down everyone else's tastes in media. After another 3 or 4 weeks, they too had all they can take and told Corey that he had to go. Fortunately for our protagonist, he was able to patch things up with his folks and was permitted to return home. Corey, if you're somehow reading this, I truly wish you were happy and successful in life now. But God, I hope I never have to see you again for the rest of my f***ing life. End of story. Oh boy, this one definitely left a bad taste in my mouth. Mostly because of my own experience with bad roommates, but I digress. Normally, RPG horror stories are filled with comments asking the OP, why didn't you just kick them out? Well, dear viewer, that's the problem with roommates. You literally cannot escape them. Imagine kicking a player out of your D&D group, and then having them sit on the living room couch staring daggers at you every time you leave your room to heat up your microwave Hot Pocket. Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but that would get pretty old pretty fast. I'm just glad that Corey is no longer in the house. You get it? Like Corey in the house? Oh, go to hell, that was hilarious. Now before we go, let's take a look at this week's Gallery of the Drake. This week's fan art is done by viewer Lady Flame, and depicts a meme that I'm surprised hasn't been done already. Gold? Internet cringe? Also, we get this little bonus nugget. It's not a phase, Mom! Thank you again, Lady Flame, for submitting your art. If you want to see your artwork featured in Gallery of the Drake, be sure to send it to the email in my About section. I love receiving and reviewing fan art, and it means the world to me that I can create content that inspires artists like you to create artwork like this. With the story over and artwork displayed, we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. I would like to thank you all for listening, and I hope to see you next time in the Den of the Drake.